Okay. So answering to the question, what does enhance their capacity of establishing meaningful relationship with others? And also how ethnic and cultural diversity can be a resource rather than a threat. So these are some of the core questions of the project, but taking in mind that the focus of this presentation will be on sleep, the main objectives of the broader project were related to evaluate a different aspect of adolescents' development. The first one is their ecological context considering the microsystem, so parents, friends, school, leisure time, the mesosystem, and so the interactions between the microsystems, the ecosystem, so considering also local policies and mass media, and the macrosystem, considering the cultural norm. The first aim was to understand the connection between all these variables of the different ecological contexts of adolescents with their identities development, considering the personal, the social, and the human identities of adolescents. The second aim was to understand how this connection, so first the identity, the different kind of identities are related to their well-being, and well-being considered in a multidimensional way, so considering the physical health, the psychological well-being, and the social well-being, and finally also to understand the connection between ecological context and their well-being. Also during the project, I will show you the study design was a very long project, a very long longitudinal project. So during the project, some natural things happened, and we were able also to evaluate some specific aspects of this historical period, so related to COVID-19, to Ukrainian war, and also to some natural disaster that happened in the region in which the project was developed. So the sample is roughly around 1,500 adolescents, and it was based on two main cohorts. The first one followed adolescents from 14 to 16 years old, and the second one from 16 to 18 years old. And this was why this is due to the Italian school system. That is, in this way, we were able to follow adolescents in all the high school period. And due to some Italian fundings, there will be also a follow-up on their 18 and 20 years old. This is an overview of the multi-method that we used in the Identities project. So basically, we followed adolescents for 3 years, from January, February 2022 to January, February 2024. And we had different time points for a total of 7. And of different types. So we have annual waves, monthly waves, and daily waves. In all the waves, adolescents wore an actigraph for recording their objective sleep for 1 week and answer to the questionnaires. But also you can see that in the annual wave, that was the bigger one, we also collected data from their parents, from their teachers, from the school archive data, and from we analyzed the newspaper online. Then during the daily waves, basically adolescents just answer to a questionnaire for 1 week. And then, as I was saying, there will be a follow-up at the beginning of January 2026. So moving to the main focus of this presentation, so about, what we did related to sleep. Just to provide a bit of theoretical background, we relied on a multidimensional operationalization of sleep health. So basically, we considered sleep as a multifaceted construct composed of more quantitative aspect and more qualitative aspect. With the more quantitative, we meant like the sleep duration, the sleep onset latency, the number of nocturnal awakenings. But we also considered the more structural, such as the sleep schedule, and qualitative, so the self-perception of their sleep quality. And we adopted also a multi-method approach. So we used the subjective sleep measures and the objective sleep measures. We also relied on the perfect storm model for adolescent sleep health. So we basically considered the fact that during this life stage, adolescents face both bioregulatory pressures and psychosocial pressure that are highly in contrast with the societal pressure in this life stage. And this basically led to a situation of short sleep duration and poor sleep quality in adolescents. Yes. And all the changes of sleep during adolescence, all these changes, all the multidimensional aspect of sleep, we evaluated them in a socio-ecological framework. So basically, using this framework, we postulated that sleep health dimensions are independently or interactively intertwined with several aspects of adolescent psychology. So before moving to the empirical studies, I wanted to provide you an overview of what we did in the process of collecting data. So basically, when we went to the school and collecting data, we tried to summarize and analyze all the longitudinal literature about the interplay between different aspects of sleep, considering the quantitative, the qualitative, and the pathological aspect, and the bidirectional longitudinal association with different aspects of their social ecology. So basically, we consider it individual characteristic like physical health, mental health, and positive well-being, the social context, so the school, the family, the peer context, and the digital media use, as well as the broader socio-cultural context. This meta-analytical project was pre-registered in Prospero, and now all the related publications are published. The eligibility criteria for this meta-analytical project were that the studies had to rely on a sample of adolescents. They need to use the longitudinal study design and to evaluate at least one aspect of sleep. The literature search was up to January 28 in 2023, and several search strategies were applied in order to be as much inclusive as possible. So I tried to summarize the main results. In this slide, you can see basically the association between psychosocial development variables to sleep health dimension over time. And basically, the results showed that for what concerned mental health and physical health, higher psychological well-being was significantly associated with higher sleep health, while higher externalizing internalizing symptoms were related to lower sleep health. For what concerned the social context, we can see that the negative relationships with family and the negative relationships with peers were associated to lower sleep health, as well as some aspect of digital media use. So, for example, the dysfunctional use and the social media use, as well as the moving to the broader sociocultural context, the higher perception of ethnic discrimination was associated with lower sleep health. Moving to the other way around, so considering the opposite direction, so from sleep health at one time point and psychosocial development variables over time, studies were a bit less than the other direction of studies. And the results showed us that basically positive well-being in general, so subjective well-being, psychological well-being, were associated to higher sleep health, while externalizing symptom and internalizing symptom were associated with lower sleep health. Regarding the social context, only negative relationship with peers, but not with family, and the dysfunctional use in the digital media use were associated with lower sleep health. The take-home message of this big meta-analytic project was that basically we saw that effectively in literature there are some evidence for a bidirectional longitudinal association between sleep health, conceptualized at longer sleep duration, higher sleep quality, and lower level of sleep disturbances, and several aspects of adolescent psychosocial development, but also that there are some main gaps that need to be addressed. And the first one was that most of the studies basically considered only one direction of this association. They used only subjective measure of sleep health, so most of them consider only questionnaires. They consider only a single aspect. So, for example, most of them considered, like sleep duration with BMI or sleep schedule with school start times, etc. And they only use only 2 time points with an average time lag of about 1 year. So in the empirical studies that we did, we tried to overcome these main gaps. And we started from some preliminary results, moving to the longitudinal evidence, and I will try to summarize the main results. Just before moving to them, I just wanted to provide a quick overview of the other variables that we also considered. So using objective sleep registration, we were able to also detect the sleep depth recovery strategies of adolescents, and specifically we considered the social jet lag and the catch-up sleep. So respectively, the delay of the midpoint of sleep during the weekends and the extended weekend sleep duration. That it is, quite these constructs are quite studied in literature, and the evidence about them told us that basically they can help adolescents handling their sleep depth, but of course are also associated with some negative health outcomes, for example, the school performance or also some mental health outcomes. The other variables that we evaluated in the identities project was the chronotype. So basically, the individual's chronotype represent the phase preference related to the time of the day best suited for waking behavior, and divide the population in morning type, so people that prefer to wake up earlier and going to bed earlier, compared to the evening type that is the opposite, and there are also the intermediate type. And is well known in literature that basically during adolescence there is a natural shift toward eveningness, and that evening chronotype is associated with several both physical and mental health negative health outcomes. And taking in mind that we aim to address the question that I showed you at the very beginning of the presentation, and taking in mind the sociological framing of sleep health, we also try to answer to the question how this interaction manifests across different life domains, so the school, the relationship with the best friend, etc. How they see themselves, so basically understanding the identity formation processes and how they interact with others. So basically, one of the main outcomes of our studies related to the sleep health of adolescents were related to identity. That is related to the answering to the question, who am I? And it is considered one of the main developmental tasks during adolescence. In doing this, we relied on the three-factor models that basically state that the identity development and identity formation processes are based on the interactions of three main processes that are commitment, the choices that adolescents make in different domains, the in-depth exploration, the extent to which adolescents actively explore the commitment they have made by reflecting on their choices, reconsideration of commitment, the comparison of current commitment with possible alternative and more satisfactory ones. And basically, in this model, it is also postulated that identity is an interactive process. So basically, there are some continuous cycles of formation and maintenance. So the identity formation cycle is based on the interaction between commitment and reconsideration of commitment, while the maintenance ones is based on the interaction between commitment and in-depth exploration. Of course, when the identity maintenance failed, you can came back to the reconsideration of commitment and starting again in the identity formation cycle. All these processes can be applied in different crucial life domains of adolescents, but in the identities project, we relied on two main of them that are the educational and then the interpersonal. So the educational is related to the choices that adolescents made in the school context, while the interpersonal is based on the relationships with their best friends. What is already known about identity and sleep? It is well known in literature that identity is well connected to well-being in general, and specifically there is a positive impact of commitment, a negative role of reconsideration of commitment, and in-depth exploration as a double-edged sword role. But related to identity processes formation in the two life domains that we assessed, basically there are really scarce literature. So the most explored field related to identity and sleep are related to ethnic identity or gender identity. So, moving to the empirical results, the first were preliminary studies, so we only used the second wave, second time point of identities, and we basically aim to understand the effect of sleep debt recovery strategies of adolescents. So in the first study, we divided adolescents based on their actual sleep duration, so measured by actigraphic registration, and we investigated the association of sleep recovery strategies with their psychological well-being. While in the second preliminary studies, we evaluated the association between school-related experiences and specifically school performance and educational identity processes with the amount of weekend sleep recovery strategies. What the results showed was that in all adolescents, the social jet lag was related to poor school performance, but also the later bedtime and the short total sleep time during the week. Both of them measured by objective sleep, so through active graphic registration. And also that when considering differences between adolescents, basically adolescents sleeping less than 7 hours and experiencing weekend casual sleeps longer than 2 hours reported significantly lower subjective well-being. So it seems to have a negative impact on their well-being, at least in the short time lag. And also that adolescents with significant amount of social jet lag, so more than 1 hour and a half, reported higher level of in-depth exploration compared to those who would not implement any recovery strategies. Moving to the longitudinal evidence, I will try to summarize the most important one. So in this study, it was evaluated based on a multidimensional approach, the longitudinal and the daily association between multiple facets of ethnic prejudice, so affective and cognitive, and multiple indicators of well-being, including sleep health. And exactly in this bigger study, there were two main aims. The first one was to assess this association longitudinally, so from T1 to T4 across 1 year, while in the second study, it was used the daily data collection, so across 1 week. The results show that on the one hand, in the medium term, cognitive prejudice was found to precede and inform later levels of subjective sleep problems, while on the other hand, in the short term, affective prejudice led to significant changes in subjective wake problems. The interesting thing at that was that no significant paths emerged with objective sleep. Moving to another study, here in the slide, you can see the title and the link to the publication. The main aim of this study was to assess the longitudinal association, again, using a multidimensional approach between multiple indicators of sleep health. So again, considering subjective and objective sleep and identity processes in educational and interpersonal domains. Also, in this case, the first 4 waves of identities project were used, and we had a sample of around 1,300 adolescents. The main results basically show that identity processes and sleep problems seems to be intertwined, and that there is a protective role of sleep quality, particularly strong for adolescents with a migrant background. And specifically, you can see how regarding the educational identity, subjective sleep problems were related to higher reconsideration of commitment. And in turn, higher reconsideration of commitment was related to higher sleep efficiency objectively assessed. These results are over time. And while for what concern interpersonal identity, so the relationship with their best friend, higher commitment was related to higher weight problems, while for what concern objective sleep duration, higher sleep duration was associated with both in-depth exploration and reconsideration of commitment. Moving to another study, so a bit of some more results. In this case, we didn't use the objective sleep, but we relied on the chronotype measure. And basically, the main aim of the study was to assess if adolescent chronotype, so evening, intermediate, and morning type, would be associated with different level of educational identity processes. So in this case, we only considered educational identity. And if the adolescent's developmental trajectories of educational identity processes could mediate the link between adolescent's chronotype and school performance. These aims were based on the goodness of fit model, for which basically individuals' well-being can rely on the fit between individual characteristics, so in this case, adolescence chronotype, and the environment demands. So in this case, we considered the school demands, both in terms of structure and homework, etc. So the main results, also in this case, the sample was based on the first 4 waves, and the main results showed us that basically the main differences between the 3 groups were tackled only at baseline, so only at the initial levels and not in the trajectories. And as you can see, even in chronotype, adolescents showed significantly lower level of commitment, level of in-depth exploration, and significantly higher reconsideration of commitment compared to the other 2 groups. And regarding the mediation model, results showed us that in-depth exploration seems to mediate the relationship between chronotype and school performance with a positive connection. Just a mention to this, the questionnaire that we used to assess the chronotype was validated through active graphic registration, and the studies was published and validated also through identities project results. So basically, the discussion of this study, it highlights some important things, and basically how the fit between individual characteristic and environment characteristic seems to be very important, and also the fact that main differences in educational identity among chronotype was tackled at baseline, basically opened the way for really preventive and targeted and tailored interventions to be implemented at the school level. And just to trying to sum up a general discussion on the results of these studies, basically the most important take-home message was that it seems to be a very strong connection between different aspects of sleep health and different aspects of adolescents' psychosocial development in general, but that also that different aspects seems to be related to other aspects in different ways. So it is very important to tackle all these aspects in future longitudinal studies. And that also a mention to the limits that we try to overcome. So basically, we try to consider it both the direction of the association and not only one, in order to have a more comprehensive and overall picture of these connections. We use the subjective and objective measure of sleep health in order to have both the measures and the perception of adolescents. That is also very important. We considered more than only one aspect of both sleep health and psychosocial development variables. So basically, we try to understand how the different aspects are intertwined within each other, and we try to use different time lengths. So, for example, the daily one and the longer longitudinal one. And just a brief mention to some future studies that are ongoing, in which basically we are trying to understand how this connection between sleep health and psychosocial development evolve in real life of adolescents. So in first studies that we are currently conducting, we are trying to understand how different aspects of sleep, both subjective and objective, is related to adolescents' intergroup contact, both in the school context and in their leisure time. And on the other hand, as I was mentioning before, we unfortunately actually, but all the project was based in the Emilia-Romagna region, so in the north of Italy. And in 2023, around May, there was this major flooding event that was a natural disaster, and basically we were able to explore if sleep health of adolescents basically can moderate their resilience and their answer to the natural disaster. And this study is actually under review, and the main project is pre-registered on OSF. And so I conclude. I would like to thank you for your attention, and of course, I would like to thank all the identities teams. Thank you very much. Hi.
Thank you for your interesting presentation. And I think that I have two questions.
Yeah.
First of all, I heard that you can explain about you have collect information about social media and
Mm-hmm.
social networks or something like that. That my question is, how do you include this information in the ecological or study or system about the adolescents that can participate in this research? Thank you.
Thank you for your question. And yeah, basically the social media variables, we explore the role, the interplay with sleep health on the meta-analysis. So it was not an original study from our group. And it was conceptualized as a meso-context. So basically the interaction between individuals and friends and parents, but it was, in the social context fields. So basically we considered the social media use as a way that adolescents have to interact with others, basically. And the results of the meta-analysis showed us that um, higher problematic digital media use was associated with lower sleep health, but it is quite, it is quite well known in literature that the use of digital media during the evening, it is quite increased nowadays in adolescents. So we know that it is a risk factor. We didn't analyze our data for now, but we really want to do that. So looking forward to understand. Uh, the results from our project.
Hi, Valeria.
Yeah.
I'm Giulia, a fellow Italian researcher.
Hi.
Thank you very much for your presentation. It was really interesting. I was wondering if you have an explanation or if you have thought about mechanisms why chronotype would be related, for example, in your last results to the educational process, identity processes, like commitment, because I like to think as being a late chronotype or even in chronotype not being a problem per se, just being a problem if you live in a society with early, for example, school starting times. But we always find these associations with a lot of problems for late chronotypes. So yeah, I was wondering if you have an explanation why there is such a relationship. How would you explain it? Thank you.
Thank you very much for the question. I think that is one of the most interesting aspects, actually, because as you said, we don't want to stigmatize even in chronotype adolescents and people in general. But I think that it is quite important and of utmost importance in our Italian context, for which Italian school system basically has to adolescents to wake up very, very early. And in some cases, they also need to wake up even earlier to go to the school. So basically, the explanation that, the first one is that we only saw the differences between chronotype at the very beginning, so only at the initial level and not in the trajectories of identity processes. So basically, it's something that you can tackle at the baseline and on which you can basically intervene very early if you're able to modulate the school system in some ways. But also, it is a bit of confirmation on the goodness of fit model. So basically, if you have an evening chronotype and you are forced to be very active in the morning and to wake up very early, and this is highly in contrast with your personal characteristic, of course, this can have some consequences, and you can be, more interested in making commitment in school, and maybe you can do that in something else that is more that fits more with your individual characteristic. I don't know if I answered to the question.